Hello, and welcome to S.T.E.A.M of Consciousness, a program presented by the ARI Podcasting Network and hosted by George Koperna. What is S.T.E.A.M? S.T.E.A.M stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. During each episode, we will take a few minutes to sit down with professionals in different STEAM-related fields to give them an opportunity to share their story and give their perspectives with the goal of promoting career awareness to potentially interested students, young professionals, and of course, anyone else who shares a fascination with these areas of study. And now, please join us as we tap into the S.T.E.A.M of consciousness.
Welcome to S.T.E.A.M of Consciousness, a podcast about choice and options. And today we're really happy to sit down with Dr. Ben Wernette with the Southern States Energy Board, or SSEB, as we'll probably abbreviate throughout the podcast. And his role there is the principal scientist and strategic partnership lead. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, good morning. It's great to be here, George. Thanks for having me.
No, we're real pleased to have you here today. And tell us a little bit about what you do at the Southern States Energy Board.
Yeah, sure. So we're a little bit of an odd bird. The Southern States Energy Board is what's known as an interstate compact organization consisting of 16 southern states and 2 U.S. territories, those being Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We were originally created in the 1960s as the Southern Interstate Nuclear Board. But over time and with evolving needs of our region, we've transitioned into a broader organization focused on a number of topics related to energy and environment, and have changed our name to reflect that new mission. So we are now the Southern States Energy Board. Our mandate, broadly speaking, is to improve quality of life in the South through innovations in energy and environmental programs, policies, technologies. The staff of which I'm a part is really responsible for implementing that mission of the board and reporting back to the board itself. The board currently is comprised of governors and legislators from our region. Our current chair, for example, is Governor Kay Ivey of Alabama. Again, the staff has a responsibility to implement that mission very commonly by working with industry in the Southeast as well as the federal government. We have 2 principal research programs, if you will, one of which is still very much focused in our history and radioactive waste transportation across the Southeast and coordinating that activity across different municipalities. And then the other of which is our carbon management research program, which is a fairly extensive program. Currently, we have 10 carbon management projects focused kind of all over the Southeast and on a variety of activities, and a number of other projects that are kind of in the hopper here.
Really, really neat. And your role there is to do what with those
Yeah,
projects?
so it's kind of we're a small organization, so there's 11 staff members that implement these projects, oversee these activities, and report back to our board. Um, because we are such a small staff, we all kind of wear many hats within the organization. Broadly speaking, my role is to serve as a general project manager to oversee the activities of our ongoing carbon management portfolio. Because we are such a small staff, we certainly can't do all of the work for all of the projects. So we work really closely with a number of subcontractors and partners, such as Advanced Resources International, for example, to help implement these projects. So my role really is to try to put the broader puzzle of a project together, oversee that, ensure that its execution is on scope, within budget, and remains on schedule. In addition to that, I also spend a lot of time working with our partners and our industry colleagues in the Southeast to identify new opportunities for project development that is responsive to our mission of improving quality of life in the Southeast, and perhaps something that we feel is kind of on the cutting edge or important to the future development of the economies of the Southeastern US as well. Um, Kind of outside of the technical role, I do spend more time liaising with our board. So communicating regularly with legislators in the Southeast, where appropriate, meeting with governors that are active in the board, and then working some in DC as well.
It must be really interesting. Meet
Yeah,
a lot of cool people. Um, Thinking about this, I know you have a number of degrees in the geoscience space.
that's right.
Is when you were little, Dr. Wernette, did you want to be a geoscientist when you grew up? What What were you thinking when you were little?
I think truthfully, like most kids, I probably had more energy and a general lack of attention and really had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. Um, I grew up in Auburn, Alabama, and had a really vibrant childhood experience. I think throughout high school, I had my eyes set on becoming a musician, and after finishing high school, quickly determined that the probability of me hitting it big as a rock star was pretty low. Um, I think, again, not really understanding, or at least perhaps needing the time to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I enrolled in a local trade school actually, and was a certified emergency medical technician, or an EMT. um, After identifying that perhaps the medical field was not for me, I took some time off from school and in my academics, more broadly, and worked out west in Colorado, for a period of time. Um, After working out west, really fell in love with the Rocky Mountains, and I think just really enjoyed kind of the convergence of a lot of my interests, being outside, fishing, looking at pretty mountains. Um, so I decided to kind of reapply myself, and enrolled at Auburn University in the fall of 2012. That would have been. I started out thinking I was good at chemistry, and I think quickly identified that I was okay, but I think long term, the career prospects in the field of chemistry felt somewhat boring, to be quite honest with you. So I started focusing on, again, kind of the convergence of my interests. I enrolled in some early geology classes, kind of your 101 curricula, and found that it really spoke to me in a number of different ways. And so I got really interested in the geosciences really early and started working closely with a variety of faculty members at Auburn. I did some research in my undergrad working with Dr. Sean Wright, who I believe now is at Johnson Space Center. We were doing some assessments of some impact craters in India. This is called the Lonar crater in India. And then I started working some with Dr. Saunders at Auburn too, and thinking about ways to ensure that the skill sets that I was developing in the geosciences were applicable to the professional environment, but also to responding to a need for, I think, the economy more broadly. So I got really interested in economic geology. So thinking about evaluating, studying, understanding precious metal ore bodies. So where we get our copper, zinc, nickel, gold, silver, platinum group elements, all that good stuff. And started doing some research with Dr. Saunders. Through that relationship, I started growing in my role at Auburn in my undergraduate education, and started teaching undergraduate courses, primarily laboratory aspects of coursework, in my junior and senior year at Auburn, and was able to graduate from Auburn and ultimately intern for Barrick Gold in Nevada, where I was an exploration geologist, primarily focused on mapping the periphery of the mine itself to try to understand opportunities to expand the mine outside of its current operations.
So I think you hit on some pretty interesting things along that. So I'm just going to rewind just a skosh,
Sure. Yeah.
and I think it's pretty telling that you got some opportunities as an undergrad that I don't think are presented to a lot of undergrads. You were teaching labs, You
Hmm.
did the basic research and R&D.
Hmm.
And did that kind of color your interest or scratch that itch that fulfilled you in some way that when you began to make decisions about future choice, you said, I
Yeah.
really like this, or was that just a happenstance?
No, I think, I mean, the one thing that I can't stress enough is none of those opportunities just fell in my lap, right? I showed interest, and I think throughout kind of my professional development, it's become um, well, it's been proven time and again that taking initiative and showing interest is something that people, generally speaking, really appreciate. And I think being thoughtful and authentic and trying to grow in whatever your role is only met positively by people who are more experienced, more senior. Um, so I actually started out by just looking for research opportunities, trying to learn more about the subject, trying to learn more about the variety of tools that are used in the science, not necessarily with any end goal in mind, I don't think. I just really wanted to begin to grow in my understanding of the geosciences more broadly. And that's how I started working with Sean Wright, primarily working with X-ray diffraction, which is a tool used to identify bulk mineralogy for crushed samples. My, teaching experience at that time was really out of a need from the department, just needing people to help assist in teaching labs. I do think ultimately those experiences together helped me start to narrow down what I was interested in. I knew I enjoyed the analytical side of the science. I really enjoyed kind of figuring out pieces to a puzzle that tell a story. Ultimately, there's a kind of a aspect of history to the geosciences and putting together pieces of a mystery that I found really interesting. And I really enjoyed teaching. So it seemed that both the research and the teaching components in my undergraduate education were pointing me towards going to grad school long term because I enjoyed both aspects.
That's phenomenal. And I'm going to warn you, you're trending on analytics, solving puzzles. You're starting to sound like an engineer. I might have to report you to the geology board. But in all seriousness, then you were able to get back to where you were in your conversation, an internship, applying those things. And what did that do? Was it during that you decided to go on to grad school, or had you already made that decision prior to taking the internship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I graduated in the fall of 2014, and so I had a gap in the following year until graduate school kicked off in the fall of 15. Through my relationships at Auburn, I was really able to acquire that internship opportunity at Barrick Gold. This was at the Cortez mine in north central Nevada, kind of an hour southwest of Elko, Nevada. Um, I, I had applied to graduate school before the internship opportunity, but as I said, I had this gap in my schedule, and I really wanted to start building professional experience in this space, and was just fortunate to get this opportunity. So I moved out west for the summer and worked for Barrick. The work that I was primarily doing again was kind of intern level work, and that's not to discount the work or the effort, but a lot of it was focused on sampling again of the periphery of the active mine itself, trying to assay those samples to identify areas that might warrant further exploration. If some of that kind of high level sampling work deemed um, further investigation was appropriate, we would bring in kind of small mineral rigs to do some drilling work to further assess kind of what's going on at depth as well. So I spent a lot of time in the lab cataloging samples, using X-ray diffraction to identify and describe the core that was being collected from the site and compiling all of that information into a database that the senior geologists and the exploration geologists kind of incorporated into their mapping and characterization work of the broader area. I really enjoyed working there, and the experience was really fruitful in a number of ways. I think one major takeaway is you never know as much as you think you do. I think it reiterated some of my experiences from my undergrad, and those were primarily rooted in, being sure to listen to those that are more senior than you, because they have a lot to teach you as well. Um, and so from there, I finished up, I got engaged and moved to Indiana Bloomington, where I started my master's work.
And you still wanted to stay in the geoscience where you leaned, did that those experiences kind of carve a direction for you, or were you a little more focused for your master's program?
I was, yeah. And so I very much was in the economic geology world at that point. I'd worked at this gold deposit in Nevada, was super interested again in using my skill set to, I think, advance society, but also to trying to ensure that I had a viable career path long term, right? So trying to be a little selective in what I was really focusing on throughout my studies and through my experience. So I went to Indiana Bloomington to continue my work in the economic geology space. I worked with a professor named Dr. Ed Ripley at Indiana Bloomington, who was, I mean, really one of the founding fathers of using stable isotope geochemistry to further understand the origin of precious metal ore bodies. So here I was working with Dr. Ripley on primarily using sulfur isotopes to understand the origin of the 2.7 billion year old Stillwater complex, which is a pretty large platinum group element deposit that's located just outside the Beartooth Uplift in south central Montana. So I did a lot of work of evaluating data from the mine itself, collecting sulfur isotopic data, and spent a lot of time looking at kind of the microstructures and all these samples that we were evaluating to try to better understand the long-term evolution of the ore body. At 2.7 billion years old, there was quite a lot of history there, right? So we were finding a lot of the deposit, of course, primarily magmatic in origin, but we were also finding that there's a lot of alteration of the rock over time that was also impacting the ore as well. And those relationships were communicated at times with the operators of the mine, somewhat of a collaborative relationship, if you will, there. Um, but ultimately found it to be a really interesting experience that again built on my undergrad and my internship experience as well.
And so, I think most graduate programs, and I'm guessing yours was not very different, that you were working on an assistantship, an R&D project
Yep.
that helped defray some of the costs for that education. So, I mean, that's a nice bonus to that endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was covered by both a researching assistantship and a teaching assistantship as well. And the benefit of that, of course, is that the cost of my education was largely free. And I say largely because not all states handle graduate education this way, but Indiana did, and that was the legislature decided that even graduate students need some stake in their long-term education. So we were responsible for a minor expense of our broader education. And when I say minor, I mean it was a fraction of the overall cost, right? But my education was largely free, and I was paid for my time as well. Um, which I think is incredibly helpful, right? I mean, you're not taking on any sort of student loan debt to advance your education, and you're making, um, albeit not much money, you're making enough money to pay rent and get a pizza with your friends, every Friday or something like that.
Fantastic. And so you've gone through your undergraduate program, you've had some tangible work experience.
Yeah.
And you've continued on in your master's degree with more teaching, which you said you enjoyed. Were you still loving the teaching at that point?
Yeah, I was. I've always, I don't know what it is about teaching. I think it's, again, the challenge of communicating the story and the excitement behind science that I really enjoy. And two, seeing other people um, really enjoy the same material that resonates so well with you. And that's an experience that I still try to find now in my current role. And fortunately, because we have so many opportunities to interface with our partners in academia or otherwise, there's still some opportunity to scratch that itch, if you will.
Fantastic. And of course, master's work always comes with the R&D. So
Yep.
were you already beginning to lean towards a PhD, thinking that, hey, I might want to be an academic? I don't know yet. Or guide us through that thought process. You're graduating with a master's degree. You probably
Yep.
have enough experience to enter the private sector if you wish,
Yep.
or continue on.
Yeah. It was a really interesting time because we were, Indiana Bloomington, historically speaking, is a really strong geology program. And because of that, we were fortunate enough to be visited by a number of recruiters from kind of your majors, your oil and gas companies. So I was pretty actively interviewing with the likes of Exxon and Chevron and others when I was kind of concluding my master's. Um, the work as described to me was certainly interesting, but I don't know at the time that I was maybe ready for some of that, if I'm being totally honest with you. I'd contemplated going to work for Barrick again, just with some existing relationships I had in my time in the precious metal space. There were a few opportunities that I explored there. And then I was fortunate enough to be offered a doctoral position at Indiana Bloomington as well. Um, I started kind of just weighing the pros and cons and ultimately wound up at, I think at the time I was 27. I knew I enjoyed research. I knew I enjoyed teaching and just thought, well, ultimately, if I think long term, I want a doctorate. Now's probably the time to go ahead and do it. I mean, the likelihood of revisiting it after getting established in a career is um, probably slim to none, right? So, started looking at different opportunities, doing similar research to what I'd done at Indiana. Of course, was looking at potentially staying at IU and working with Ed and advancing my work there on the Stillwater complex. But through that work, had become familiar with Dr. Alan Boudreau at Duke University, who had a position open. It was kind of a joint uh, mentorship position. Dr. Emily Klein, she's a mid-ocean ridge basalt geochemist. She's really well respected in the broader field of geochemistry. In fact, she won a Goldschmidt Award, which is highly prestigious in the field of geochemistry for her work on mid-ocean basalt geochemistry and ultimately understanding the chemical signatures of the depth and temperatures at which oceanic crust is formed. So Dr. Klein and Alan, Dr. Boudreau, came to me with kind of this proposition of a PhD that explored both mid-ocean ridge basalt geochemistry, as well as continuing some of the work I'd done at Indiana, which was primarily focused on platinum group element deposits. And so in the spectrum of geochemistry, you're kind of talking about similar rocks, if you will, their formation and the processes that led to their formation, mid-ocean ridge basalts or layered intrusions that form platinum group element deposits, are just different, right? So we were able to kind of package this into a research endeavor that was primarily looking at the petrography and the geochemistry of basaltic magmas, which is just referring to the elemental composition of the magmas that go on to form mid-ocean ridge basalts or platinum group element deposits in this case. So I worked with Emily on understanding the East Pacific rise in the Pacific Ocean. We were on a, oh gosh, 40-ish day research cruise out of Scripps in San Diego. And then with Dr. Boudreau, I spent a lot of time investigating small scale textures of the Skaergaard intrusion in East Greenland to try to understand the origin and evolution of the Skaergaard intrusion there in East Greenland.
Fantastic. You got to go on a boat, do some work.
Yeah. I lived on a boat for, I guess, a month plus. Yeah, maybe 6 weeks or so, um, which was a really interesting experience. I mean, having the opportunity to, fly out west to, sail out of Scripps to work with, I mean, just world-class scientists from all over the world was really fulfilling and one of those experiences where you just learn more than you could ever hope to learn. We were looking at the Cocos-Nazca Rift, which, if you're looking at a map, is about 1,000 miles north of the Galapagos Islands, and is running kind of orthogonal to the East Pacific Rise. Um, we were able to dredge that system, so you can think of it as kind of putting down almost like a bucket from a tractor into the ocean and collecting materials at set points. We then use those materials to go back to the laboratory, study their chemical composition, but also to look at their petrography, so looking at the texture of the minerals within the samples as well to try to understand the evolution of that Cocos-Nazca rift system. All of that was kind of put into context with some of the geophysical surveying work that we'd done while on board the vessel as well. So yeah, it was a good experience.
And I think it's really important to kind of highlight, and I appreciate the added color. It's fantastic that just because you're doing laboratory R&D work doesn't mean you're always in the lab, right? You get to go out and put your touch ground, do those, or in this case, touch water.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's one of the more exciting aspects of geosciences is, you know, I think it's one of the rare fields where you get to marry that field work and that laboratory work, all working to the same end of answering some scientific question, right? Um, sure, some months you may be spending more time in the lab than you want, but, ultimately, I think reminding yourself that you're working towards understanding your observations in the real world, the non-lab world, is really helpful. Um, I think too, finally, I mean, there's just a skill set that's developed in the laboratory space that I think is really important. It's, understanding processes, it's troubleshooting, it's attention to detail. And I think no matter what field I interact with in my professional life now, whether it's engineering or whether I'm working with physicists or other geoscientists, as long as there's that shared laboratory experience across those disciplines that people have had throughout their education or their professional life, there very commonly is a common language or at least a common mentality that's shared across those disciplines as well.
And I know we're running towards the end of this your time slot, and I really appreciate all the time you had. But I
Yeah,
think
of
it's
course.
two things I'd like to touch on, and the first is you're got your PhD,
Hmm.
and you can enter academia if you want. What kind of in a minute or so explain what your choice process was in entering the private sector, or in this case,
Yeah.
continuing on.
Yeah, well, I think, like everyone finishing their PhD was just kind of faced with, I guess, what I was really contemplating after finishing my master's, but maybe with a little more optionality, and that you could go the academics route if you were so inclined, or find a job outside of academia. I had applied to a few open faculty positions at a few small universities. Um, and ultimately found that I had been totally exhausted of the academic environment. And that's not a reflection of any of my experiences with anybody I worked with. It was an incredibly fulfilling experience, and I think largely responsible for who I am today. But ultimately, after going on 10 years in higher education, I just decided it was time for a change. So I started networking, which I can't stress enough is an incredibly important skill to hone, throughout your development. And ultimately, through kind of professional networks and working with colleagues, found an opportunity with my current organization, Southern States Energy Board. And ultimately, in discussing the opportunity with the board, it became clear that I really have the best of both worlds in this opportunity. I can develop research projects, which is an aspect of the academic environment that I really enjoyed. But there was also, I guess, less expectation around some of the other aspects of the academic world, publications, teaching, etc. And then to a window into kind of industry more broadly, because a lot of our projects involve industry partners, academic partners, etc. And that really spoke to me. It was again just kind of a marriage of, I think, all of the experiences I've had to date. And so I was really excited about that, and ultimately joined the board as a geologist, primarily focused on, again, general project oversight, and over the last 5 years have evolved into my current role as the principal scientist and strategic partnerships lead.
So I normally conclude the interview with the same question, but I think you kind of answered what you loved about your job. So maybe we'll flip it a little bit. What's the one piece of advice you'd give a young person as they're beginning to think about moving through their process?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I always really appreciated about my education was just the diversity of experiences that I was able to have. And I think ultimately, every experience that I've had, whether it's in the academic space or the professional space, was the result of probably two things. One, networking, um, not being afraid to reach out to people with shared backgrounds, not being afraid to ask people for help. Um, and then two, I think trying to really diversify your experience. You know, you never know what little niche thing you've developed some form of expertise in over the years may benefit you in the long run. Whether that's getting comfortable with tools outside of your profession. I'm thinking now of getting some coding expertise, for example, or in your spare time learning how to work with different software, or just developing a general curiosity. I think is really helpful, because in my experience, you kind of train yourself how to ask questions and how to attack questions to get towards some kind of resolution or an answer. um, sure, maybe it's not what you're traditionally trained in, but you've kind of created a broader skill set that allows you to navigate a broad array of questions, if that makes sense. So yeah, networking, and then I think just trying on different things and seeing what gets you excited, and what gets you out of bed in the morning,
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Ben Wernette, for joining us today. This has been Stream of Consciousness, a presentation by the ARI Podcasting Network, produced by Ryan Kessler.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to listen to new episodes of Stream of Consciousness, available on your preferred podcast listening station.